Awesome. So hello everyone, I'm Alex. I am the international GM at Moonpig. And we're going to talk about exploring new markets. So actually international expansion is something that I've had a lot of experience in, both in my current role, but also in previous ones. So once upon a time I was a strategy consultant, did a lot of international expansion work there, mainly in the consumer and retail space. And I also worked at Lego in my last corporate role where I was also heading up international expansion. So I'll mainly talk about Moonpig, but also try to lay some of those other experiences in there as well. And in the Q&A, feel free to ask me about anything. So agenda, so I'll give a quick intro to Moonpig. Maybe I'll just start with, do people know what Moonpig is generally? I think so, cool. Nevertheless, I'll give a very short introduction to Moonpig. We'll then talk about international expansion and give a little bit of a case study that's a bit more specific to the Moonpig experience. So, intro to Moonpig. So it sounds like people generally know what Moonpig is. You buy physical cards online, edit them, add a gift, send them direct to a recipient ideally. But we actually, as a group, have 4 brands. So Greets, which is kind of the same as Moonpig, but based in the Netherlands. And then we have 2 experiences businesses, which we acquired a few years ago, Buy a Gift and Red Letter Days. Again, it sounds like everyone knows what Moonpig is and how it works, but just a very quick recap. You go online, we have no physical distribution, select a card, you can personalize it in a million different ways. You can add things to the front of the card, add things to the inside of the card, pictures, stickers, photos, or videos, audio, tons of things. And then you can even add a gift at the end of the journey as well and send it direct to a friend or family or loved one. In terms of our international footprint, so I would say that Moonpig is really at the very beginning of our international journey. So as you can see, we are primarily based in the UK through our Moonpig and Experiences brands. Then we have about 15% of the business, which is in the Netherlands, and that's our Greets brand. And then the rest of the world, 3%. So really tiny. We are just starting to explore new markets. For now, those are Ireland, Australia, and the US. But we are really in the very, very early stages of kind of embarking on this international expansion journey. In terms of what I am responsible for, it is that kind of 18% at the end, so Netherlands first and foremost, but then also getting these fledgling markets kind of established, up and running, et cetera. Cool, so let's talk a little bit more generically about international expansion. So I think a lot of people are interested in international expansion. I probably do not need to explain the benefits of international expansion. The most obvious one is it is a great way, maybe not the only way, but a great way to try to grow a brand of any size, but particularly a large one, as Moonpig is in the UK today. There are a whole bunch of other benefits as well. You get to reach new customers, you get to diversify your business and reduce risk that way. I think there are great learning opportunities from operating in other markets. But yeah, there are a million reasons to go abroad. I probably do not need to convince anyone of that. Challenge, of course, this is an equally obvious statement, is that international expansion is really difficult. And it's really difficult for a whole bunch of reasons. So I've kind of bucketed these in a few ways. There are many more ways and many more things that you could add to this list. Some of the obvious ones are operational. So in terms of working in different currencies and different payment methods, depending on the industry that you're in, local regulatory requirements could be quite a difficult thing that you have to deal with. Customer, so buying behavior can be totally different in different markets. The sales or marketing distribution channels you use might be totally different. And I would never underestimate cultural nuances. So I think this is particularly salient in a gifting business where that is something that is very laced with cultural specificity, does change market to market. But I don't know, even if you think about something like toys, so if I think about my experience at Lego, I think Lego's probably, and play is something that a lot of Western markets we take for granted. When we were expanding to places like China, India, a lot of Asian countries, actually the concept that a parent would encourage their kids to play as opposed to do something a little bit more productive doesn't always exist. The concept that you would not only encourage your kid to play, but potentially pay hundreds of dollars or pounds or whatever to enable them to play is frankly ridiculous in a lot of places. So there are just kind of a lot of cultural nuances that no matter how big a brand you are, no matter how big a category you operate in, you can never underestimate. And then I think there are the internal ones. So here people typically think of time and resources, how you set up your organization to succeed internationally, but actually the one that's most interesting for me, and my clicker doesn't seem to be working anymore. Cool. The one that is most interesting for me is mindset. And I say this because I think this is easily one of the most important things on this page, but also one of the areas that people tend to just miss out, ignore, forget entirely. So I think if you kind of think about the operational side of things, there are going to be a million vendors here, many of you in the crowd, who are going to support you with things like languages, with payment methods, etc. You can go hire strategy consultants to help you figure out what local buying behavior looks like or what channels you should be using. Similarly with how you set up your business organizationally, internally. But I think mindset is one that it's just people forget, and it's much harder to get outside help on. For me, the key here, in terms of adopting the right mindset to operate in new markets, is to really think like a startup. And there are kind of a couple ways I mean that. So this is a pretty generic sort of map of the different stages a startup typically goes through. So you have your drunken walk, where you're trying to find product market fit. You don't really know what you're doing a lot of testing and learning, etc. It's a very up and down journey. You then kind of find your product market fit, but you're not quite in growth stage yet because you haven't found the channels or the acquisition means to really start scaling. You find that, you then kind of go into, hopefully, hypergrowth and kind of hit a more stable level of scaling from there. And I think the problem is that established businesses, bigger organizations, are actually very used to operating at that far right in that scale mode. But actually, when you're launching a new market, you really need to be thinking about this drunken walk, very early product market fit stage. And I think a lot of big businesses and people who have worked in big businesses for most of their careers are not always very good at this. So what does thinking like a startup mean? This is a pretty generic list that I probably Googled or stole from ChatGPT, but there are kind of a bunch of obvious things here, right? Like, very much focusing on your customers, being innovative, agile, resilient, etc. But actually, I think one of the, and there are many more that we could list as well, I think one of the most important, particularly from a marketing perspective, is recognizing that no one knows who you are or what you do. And this is super important when you are a big established brand, like, for example, Moonpig is in the UK, where I say, have you guys heard of Moonpig? And all of you have, all of you intuitively already know what it is and what it's about. When you go to a new market, that is not always the case. So I'm going to try to play a video from my time at Lego. Okay, video did not work. Is there anything I can do to play it? Or no? If not, we'll just skip it, it's fine. Cool, we'll skip it. The point of the video was going to be, it was a Rebuild the World campaign that Lego launched, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It was a great video, I'm pretty sure it won lots of awards, etc. What was interesting about the ad, though, is at no point did it actually feature a Lego brick in the main body of the ad. So lots of very fun, crazy things happened. It was all about imagination. At the end, there was a Lego logo. And I think to a Western audience where you've probably grown up with Lego, your parents maybe had Lego, your grandparents had Lego, no explanation was required. But actually, like, when we played that, used that ad in new markets where people didn't know what Lego was, actually that was the reaction, is, what's Lego? Like, this is maybe kind of cool and interesting, but what's Lego? And we had, great experiences where, I forget which market it was, but there was one where on several occasions people would return a box to us and say, hey, I bought this set, but it's broken. Thinking, of course, that Lego bricks, or that it was a model that they were buying instead of something that they were meant to build themselves. So it just kind of like underscores the importance of really like not taking for granted that people know who you are and what you do. If we then think about like the Moonpig situation, so challenges we have is, one, there's no brand awareness, what we already talked about, and the Moonpig brand is not very obvious what a Moonpig is. It doesn't really like tell you much about the offering. The other thing is actually greeting cards and even gifting in most markets outside of the UK and the Netherlands are almost 100% offline. Even the US is a primarily offline market. So actually, the idea of not just explaining, okay, who we are, what is a Moonpig, but then explaining that these are physical cards, not e-cards, that you buy online and can edit and personalize, etc. online, is actually like quite a difficult challenge. It's quite difficult to do with a static Facebook ad, for example. And then once you're able to do all that, explaining to people why they should buy cards online is kind of that final challenge. So I'll explain a little bit about our approach. It's going to seem, I'm sure, ridiculously simple, ridiculously basic. That is because doing a startup is a lot about going back to basics. But it's really important. I think a lot of big corporates miss. So identify an initial target customer. This sounds pretty obvious. It sounds like a sort of marketing 101. But actually, if you think about a big established brand, like, for example, Moonpig in the UK, your customer base is going to be extremely broad. Almost any adult could be your customer. So your messaging is inevitably going to be quite broad. You're going to be using quite broad reach channels, etc. In a new market, you can't do that. You really need to identify who is the initial target customer, who's most likely to be your early adopter, and communicate very specifically to them. In our case, that happens to be millennials, and more often than not, millennial women. The main reason for that is kind of a number of things. They're at the right life stage where they start thinking about buying greeting cards because they have occasions to buy greeting cards because their friends and families are getting married, their friends and families are having kids, they have parents who are retiring, whatever. There are a whole bunch of occasions that suddenly pop up that maybe don't exist in your 20s. So a lot of people think that greeting cards feels like an industry that might be dying. It's not. There's no evidence to prove that, but it is an industry that is very specific and kicks in at a particular life stage. So that's why we happen to focus on millennials. Obviously, the target consumer or customer will differ for different brands. Explaining the concept. So again, this is super important. As I said, greeting cards sounds like it might be really simple. Lego sounds like it'd probably be pretty simple to explain. Weirdly, they're not if markets aren't used to them. I wouldn't say this is the great asset we have, but it kind of hammers home the point where, you know, we're showing physical cards as much as possible so that people understand what it is, that primarily that it's not really an e-card. We're telling people as much as possible through signals like saying we're an online card store, or including a URL in a search bar. Just all these little cues that we are an online business as opposed to something that you can find in any physical channel. And then finally, kind of at every single turn, explaining how it works. So again, this is probably not the best way to do that, but it's just an asset that I think does all of those things in a very obvious way. I think then another critical thing is because actually for us specifically, a big challenge we have in these new markets is moving an offline channel online. The very important thing is to say, okay, well, why? Why should someone, like, writing a card, posting it, it's not necessarily the most difficult thing in the entire world. Why are you better off doing that online? There are a whole bunch of reasons, but actually in new markets, and we've done a lot of testing around this, which is super important, what we found is that our killer USP is that you can upload a photo and personalize in a whole bunch of other ways as well. But the simplest way to start is by saying, look, you can actually, from your phone, add a photo or a bunch of photos to the card. That is something that you cannot really do with an offline card, and that is a huge differentiator for us. And that's really actually how Moonpig built the online channel from scratch in the UK. I'm going to guess my videos are not going to play here as well. That's okay. The point here was about channels. So I think once you've kind of settled on, you know, who is your target customer, what is the concept that you're trying to explain, then what is the best channel in which to do that? So it's going to differ brand by brand. As I mentioned at the beginning, actually a static Facebook or Instagram ad is not the best way for us to do that. And that's probably highlighted by this. Like, this is not a great creative. I picked it because it kind of shows all the obvious things. I wouldn't say this is a very compelling creative to convince people to come online. Actually, what we found with Moonpig and in the card space, influencers are super important for us. Because with influencers, you can really explain the concept. You can have someone showing you kind of step by step how it works, how you can add a photo, how you can do all that fun stuff. And again, my last video is not going to play, but I think the other thing that's really worked with influencers is they allow us to show the impact. because I think another common mistake that people make, and actually we've seen copycats of Moonpig do this in other markets, is you can kind of explain the concept really well. You can show people that you can upload a photo, and that is a great and a powerful hook. And for a lot of people, they will intuitively understand or think, oh, that's really cool. That's something I would like to do. I'm going to go online and try this service to do it. But actually, like, uploading a photo to a card is not really the point. It's kind of a cool feature, but you are only doing that because that is going to create a great experience for a friend or family or a loved one, right? Like, that's kind of the why behind it. So I think, again, with influencers, what we've been able to do is not only explain the concept, but actually then show the impact afterwards. Show someone giving their father a Moonpig card for Father's Day and just how meaningful that is to them because they see old pictures of the family together or whatever it may be. So I think that's kind of a really critical thing here not to forget, is that you can kind of do all those basics of, explaining the concept, but if you kind of forget the why, like why people should be doing this, like why does your business exist in the first place, you're probably going to fall flat. And I think, again, this is where startups tend to have an edge, because having worked in startups myself, you spend a lot of time on the why, a lot of time on the vision, a lot of time on the purpose. And when you work for a big corporate, a lot of corporates are good at kind of reminding their employees and keeping this front and center of the corporate culture, but actually a lot aren't. And you kind of forget a little bit, get a little bit lost in the day-to-day and the machinery. And so kind of reminding yourself of why do we do this in the first place? Like, what is the core reason actually that customers use our product? It's not necessarily about the features, as good as they may be. It's about the impact that those features have. So that was it. Key takeaways: international expansion can be pretty hard. But I would not forget that the internal challenges can often be just as big as the external ones. For me at least, there'll be different approaches. For me at least, a great way to try to solve some of those challenges and set yourself up for success in the first place is by trying to adopt a startup mentality as much as possible. Cool, that's it. And I think we have time for questions. Any questions? I think there is a mic at the back.
Thank you for that. I was just curious, would you do the research by yourself if you're entering a new market, or would you hire someone in that country to help out? Thanks.
It's a little bit hard to hear, but I think the question was around like local talent. Like, do you hire someone locally? Do you put people on the ground? Do you do things from abroad? It really depends. I think you can do it both ways. So when I was at Lego, we did tend to put people on the ground. At Moonpig, we haven't. So, I mean, we have a team in the Netherlands. It's not really a new market for us. That's kind of an established business that we acquired, and that's a much more mature business. But in those newer markets that we're operating in, the US, Australia, et cetera, we have chosen not to do that. So we're still very much kind of testing, exploring those markets. We don't have people on the ground at the moment. And actually, I think kind of going back to this point about a startup, I think there's, I talked a little bit about the mindset and kind of the marketing angle to it. But actually, there's a point here around, I think, building as little physical kind of infrastructure and going through as few one-way doors as possible. So as soon as you want to hire people on the ground, you're setting up legal entities, you're kind of bringing on a lot of risk, a lot of complexity. So I think if you can avoid that, that's the ideal. You can't always. I think it's easier for us because we are a online business only. I think like in the Lego example, it's a little bit different because physical distribution was just as important as online distribution. So there was a little bit more of a justification in a business case for having people on the ground. Lego's obviously a much bigger organization than Moonpig, so it kind of had more resources available for that. But yeah, I think there's not really like a one size fits all, but the way we are approaching it is in as lean a way as possible for now. Yeah. Cool. I don't know where the
My name is Haider. I'm a product management consultant, but also an e-commerce founder. My question is, how do you sort of balance the entrepreneurial mindset within a big organization where there's probably going to be a lot of pushback, bureaucracy, etc., etc.? How do you sort of tackle some of those challenges? And it'd be great to hear some examples of how you overcame them.
Yeah, so again, like a bit hard to hear, but I think the question was about balancing the kind of bureaucracy mindset, et cetera, of working within a bigger org while trying to do this kind of startup stuff. It's a really big challenge. I think, I mean, I think the preferred way to approach it is to take a very, very small team, especially to begin with, kind of ring fence it as much as possible, and have them just kind of operate with as much autonomy as possible. So I think that's probably, like, to me, the best way I can think to do it. Lego, we kind of took a little bit of a different approach, especially with some of the bigger markets we were entering. So the biggest expansion that I did when I was at Lego was with India, and there actually that was, at the time, one of our like top 3 global priorities. CEO was talking about it every town hall, et cetera. So that was kind of a much bigger endeavor. We had a lot more people involved in it. There are kind of pros and cons to that, but actually I think the best way to do it is to have as sort of small and as ring-fenced a team as possible. Ideally hiring people who don't have that big corporate background. I think the best way to do this is hire, 3, 4, 5, 20-year-olds who have basically no work experience or a couple years of startup experience, and let them run at it. But there's not. But it's a great question, and there's not. I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all approach to that. I think a lot of companies kind of struggle with exactly how to balance that. I think kind of also the permission from the top in terms of experimentation can be super important as well. I think there's one more question.
Hi, I was wondering if you have any insight into how you structured your app to work across multiple countries. Do you know?
I don't have a huge amount of insight into exactly how we did that. Yeah, apologies.
Worries.
I mean, we basically we're working with a global platform, but yeah, sorry. Cool. I think that's it. Thank you.